Whispers of longing. Sarah idly traced the condensation on her kitchen window, the cool glass a temporary balm. Outside, Willow Creek's familiar rhythm unfolded. A black buggy, its polished surface catching the muted light, glided past, hooves marking a steady cadence on the asphalt. The driver's shadowed silhouette, faceless beneath a broad-brimmed hat, vanished around the bend. A daily tableau, a brief tableau, separating her world from their distinct one. Willow Creek, quaint and small, was increasingly a cage for Sarah's restless spirit. Her friends found contentment in Friday night lights and Sunday morning whispers, their ambitions neatly contained within the town's borders. But Sarah felt a subtle prickle, a quiet curiosity tugging at the edges of her perception. She watched Amish children at play, their laughter carried on the breeze, and imagined their games, their unspoken rules. The tales whispered around lamplit hearths. It wasn't merely curiosity. It was a yearning for profound understanding, for a connection beyond the superficial. Later, she found herself at the old oak, its roots anchoring it above Miller's Mill Pond, where the air perpetually hummed with damp earth and crushed leaves. The pond's surface, a mirror to the pale autumn sky, shivered as a lone duck cut a path. Sarah selected a smooth, flat stone and skipped it across the water, watching the ripples expand, kissing the distant bank. She yearned for her own life to feel less like a stagnant pool and more like those ever-widening rings, reaching out to touch new shores. The Amish, steadfast in their traditions, often exuded a quiet contentment she admired, even as her own perceived limitations chafed. What secrets did their world hold? What dreams were murmured in their homes, so near, yet so carefully veiled from her? Miles away, in a workshop redolent with sawdust and linseed oil, Daniel Fisher's calloused thumb stroked the smooth curve of a newly carved bird. It was a robin, its breast meticulously detailed, its tiny eye a dark, knowing bead. The reclaimed cherry wood felt warm and alive under his touch. Each cut, each stroke, was a meditation, a brief reprieve from unspoken pressures. His baptism approached, a sacred rite binding him fully to the old order, to the community he cherished. It was an honor, a profound commitment, yet a subtle disquiet stirred within him. He loved his family, his way of life, the rhythmic simplicity of their days, the shared labor, the deep-rooted faith guiding every decision. It was all he had ever known. But sometimes, especially late at night when only crickets sang, a different longing surfaced. Not rebellion, precisely, but a quiet yearning for broader perspective, for understanding the complexities of the English world just beyond their neatly fenced fields. He saw their cars hurtling down the main road, caught glimpses of bright clothes, diverse faces, and felt a fleeting pang of curiosity. What did they discuss? What stories did they tell? His younger brother, Jacob, burst into the workshop, scattering wood shavings with his energetic entrance. "Daniel, Mam wants to know if you finished the kindling for supper." Daniel carefully placed the robin on a shelf beside a half-finished horse. "Almost. Just a few more pieces." He picked up the axe, its familiar weight a comfort, and split a log with a clean, practiced swing. Splintered wood flew, releasing the scent of pine and damp earth. He was a good son, a diligent worker, and he would honor his vows. But as he stacked the kindling, a small part of him wondered if fulfilling his duty meant silencing the nascent stirrings of his own heart. He envisioned a conversation with someone outside his world, someone with a different lens, someone who might understand the quiet questions lingering, unanswered, in the corners of his mind. He longed for connection, a true meeting of minds, a shared understanding transcending the boundaries of tradition and expectation. Both Sarah and Daniel, unknown to each other, felt an undefinable pull, a silent whisper promising a different kind of belonging. A glimpse. Across worlds. The Saturday air at the farmer's market hummed with a different kind of energy than the stale quiet of Sarah's usual weekdays. Sunlight, diffused through the canvas awnings, dappled the overflowing baskets of produce. "Another batch of those heirloom tomatoes, dear," Aunt Clara called, her voice a cheerful chirp above the general din. Sarah, elbow deep in a crate of ruby-red globes, sorted them by size, the earthy scent a welcome antidote to the cloying sweetness of her mother's usual perfume. She loved market days, not just for the vibrant colors and fresh smells, but for the people. A kaleidoscope of faces, a temporary community blossoming for a few precious hours. Her gaze, however, kept drifting beyond her aunt's stall, past the chattering English crowd, to the quieter section where the Amish vendors set up. Their plain clothing, the women in their bonnets and long dresses, the men in their dark coats and straw hats, stood in stark contrast to the colorful chaos around them. There was a dignified grace to their movements, a focused intensity as they arranged their wares. It was a world she yearned to understand, a quiet undercurrent to her own loud existence. Among them, a young man sat behind a small wooden table, his hands deftly turning a piece of wood. He was younger than most of the Amish men she'd seen, perhaps her own age, with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes that seemed to hold an ancient wisdom. His stall wasn't overflowing with vegetables or baked goods. Instead, it displayed an array of intricately carved wooden toys, animals mostly, their smooth surfaces polished to a gleam. A miniature horse with a flowing mane, a playful fox with a curled tail, a tiny bird poised for flight. Each piece was a testament to patience and skill. Sarah found herself mesmerized. She'd always appreciated art, but these carvings felt different, imbued with a quiet soul. She watched him for several minutes, noting the way his strong fingers manipulated the tools, the subtle tilt of his head as he examined his work. He wasn't overtly trying to attract customers. His creations spoke for themselves. Aunt Clara nudged her gently. "Daydreaming again, sweet pea. We need to move these squash before Mrs. Henderson gets here." Sarah flushed, turning back to the task, but her eyes continued to steal glances. The young carver looked up then, his gaze sweeping over the bustling market. And for a fleeting instant, his eyes met hers. They were a startling shade of blue, deep and thoughtful, and for a moment, the noise of the market faded. A jolt, subtle yet undeniable, passed between them. He offered a small, polite nod, and Sarah, caught off guard, returned it with a slightly awkward dip of her head. Later, as the market began to wind down, Sarah found herself drawn to his stall. She picked up a small wooden bird, its wings delicately spread as if in mid-flight. The wood felt smooth and warm beneath her fingers. "This is beautiful," she said, her voice a little softer than intended. Daniel, for it was he, looked up from the piece he was currently working on, a small, uncarved block of oak. "Thank you," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, with a soft, melodic lilt. "It is a robin." "It's very lifelike," Sarah complimented, tracing the contours of the bird's wing. "Do you carve all of these yourself?" He nodded. "Since I was a boy, my father taught me." His gaze lingered on her for a moment, a flicker of curiosity in his blue eyes. "Are you enjoying the market?" "Yes. I help my Aunt Clara with her vegetables," Sarah replied, gesturing vaguely towards Aunt Clara's now half-empty stall. "It's always so lively here." "It is," Daniel agreed, a faint smile touching his lips. He picked up a perfectly ripe tomato from a small basket he kept beside his carvings. "Your aunt's tomatoes are excellent this season." Sarah felt a blush creep up her neck. "They are. She grows them herself." The conversation felt both mundane and momentous, the simple words carrying an unspoken weight. She wanted to ask him more about his life, about his carvings, about the world beyond the market, but the moment seemed to hang in the air, fragile and tentative. Aunt Clara's voice cut through the quiet. Sarah, honey, we're packing up. Sarah started, reluctantly placing the wooden bird back on the table. Well, she said, feeling a pang of disappointment. It was nice to see your work. Daniel offered another small nod, his eyes holding hers for a fraction longer than necessary. You too, he said, his voice a quiet murmur. As Sarah walked away, the scent of fresh earth and ripe tomatoes mingled with the subtle, lingering scent of wood smoke she imagined clung to Daniel's clothes. The image of his blue eyes, filled with a quiet intensity, stayed with her, a vivid spark in the otherwise routine afternoon. He was a glimpse into a world she knew little about, a world that suddenly felt much closer, and far more intriguing than she had ever imagined. Beneath the ancient oak, the late afternoon sun, a buttery wash of gold, slanted through the canopy of leaves as Sarah navigated the familiar, winding path. It was less a path and more a deer trail, barely visible beneath the fallen leaves and tangled undergrowth that marked the edge of her aunt's property. Her destination was an old oak, a truly colossal specimen whose gnarled branches spread like ancient arthritic fingers against the sky. It stood sentinel on the invisible line where her world blurred into the Amish farmlands, a silent witness to generations. For Sarah, it was a sanctuary, a place where the clamor of the market and the subtle anxieties about her future could dissolve into the rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of crickets. She pushed through a final curtain of wild grapevines, emerging into the small, sun-dappled clearing beneath the oak. Her breath hitched. Daniel was there. He stood with his back to her, one hand resting lightly on the rough bark of the trunk, his broad-brimmed hat tilted back slightly. The setting sun caught the edges of his dark clothing, burnishing them with amber, and illuminated the fine dust motes dancing in the air around him. He seemed to be studying something carved into the tree, his posture one of quiet contemplation. Sarah felt a blush creep up her neck. This was her secret spot, her refuge. The sudden intimacy of finding him here, in this place she considered uniquely hers, was startling. Daniel, perhaps sensing her presence, turned slowly. His blue eyes, which had held a distant, introspective look, widened slightly in surprise. A faint flush rose on his cheeks, mirroring hers. He removed his hat, holding it loosely in his hands, a gesture that made him seem younger, less composed than he had at the market. Sarah, he said, his voice a low murmur, almost swallowed by the breeze. I didn't expect anyone. Nor I, she replied. Her voice a little breathy, she gestured vaguely at the tree. It's a special place for me. He nodded, his gaze returning to the ancient oak. For me, too. My grow store, he brought me here often when I was small. Said this tree knew all the secrets of the valley. He paused, then indicated a spot on the trunk with his chin. See here. My grow store carved his initials. Daniel Fisher, 1903. Sarah stepped closer, tracing the faded letters with her finger, a shiver running through her. My great-grandmother told me stories about this tree, said it was here before the first settlers, that it had seen everything. She looked up at him, a genuine smile replacing her initial awkwardness. It's funny, isn't it, that we both come here? Daniel's lips curved upwards in a small, tentative smile. Perhaps not so funny. It feels peaceful here, away from everything. His eyes flickered towards the distant, ordered fields of his community, then back to Sarah. You come here often? Whenever I need to think, she confessed, or sometimes just to listen to the quiet. She shifted her weight, suddenly aware of the silence stretching between them, a silence that felt different from the one she usually sought here. It was charged, expectant. What were you thinking about just now? He hesitated, then slowly lowered himself to sit at the base of the tree, patting the ground beside him. Sarah accepted the unspoken invitation, settling down with her back against the rough bark. My baptism, he admitted, his voice softer, more reflective. It's soon, My parents, they are proud. It is a good thing. He picked up a fallen acorn, turning it over and over in his fingers. But sometimes, I wonder about the world beyond our fences. He glanced at her, a fleeting, almost shy curiosity in his eyes. Your world is very different, yes? Sarah considered her answer. In some ways, yes. In others, perhaps not so much. We all seek peace, don't we? And connection. She looked at the intricate patterns of light and shadow filtering through the leaves above them. It must be hard, knowing your path is so clearly set. He sighed, a soft expulsion of air. It is a comfort, mostly. But there are moments, like at the market, seeing all the new things, and then here, seeing you. He met her gaze directly, and for a moment, the unspoken understanding between them hung in the air, as tangible as the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. It was a shared secret, a fragile thread spun between two worlds that were not meant to intertwine. The setting sun cast long shadows, blurring the distinct lines of their clothes, making them seem, for a brief stolen moment, simply two people under an ancient oak. Carved secrets days bled into weeks, each one stretching longer and fuller than the last for Sarah. The ancient oak, once her private sanctuary, now hummed with a different energy, a quiet anticipation. She found herself drawn to its gnarled roots almost daily, her eyes scanning the familiar terrain, a nervous flutter in her stomach. Would he return? Had their shared secret, whispered under the dappled light, been just a fleeting moment of connection? Then, one sun-drenched afternoon, partially obscured by a fallen leaf, something caught her eye. It wasn't a note, not yet. It was a small, exquisitely carved wooden squirrel, no bigger than her thumb, its tail curved upwards in a playful arc, and its tiny eyes, mere pinpricks in the polished wood, seemed to gleam with life. Daniel, he had remembered. A warmth spread through Sarah's chest, chasing away the last vestiges of doubt. He wasn't just a stranger passing through, he was a presence, thoughtful and real. She carefully picked up the carving, tracing the smooth lines of its form. It felt solid, comforting, a tangible link between them. Her fingers tingled. The urge to respond, to acknowledge this quiet offering, was immediate and strong. But how? She couldn't just leave a note lying out. A glance around confirmed her solitude, reaching into the secret hollow she'd discovered years ago. A snug nook beneath a root that looked like a natural cavity, but was just deep enough for small treasures. She pulled out a small, folded piece of paper and a pencil stub she always carried. "Thank you," she scrawled quickly, her handwriting a little shaky with excitement. "He's beautiful. I have a secret spot here too, under the root that looks like a sleeping dragon. SM." She folded it tiny, then tucked it carefully into the same hollow where she'd found the squirrel, pushing it deep inside until it was completely hidden. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a drumbeat of daring and hope. Daniel, meanwhile, felt a similar mix of apprehension and exhilaration. Returning to the oak had become an undeniable pull, stronger than his own sense of caution. He'd left the squirrel, a piece he'd carved weeks ago but never quite found a home for, hoping it would convey what words couldn't yet. He tried to tell himself he was merely checking on the tree, a habit from his Grostar's time. But the truth was, he was checking for her. When he finally stole back, days later, under the guise of collecting fallen branches for kindling, his gaze went straight to the base of the ancient trunk. The squirrel was gone. A surge of relief, potent and sweet, washed over him. She had seen it. She had understood. Then his eyes, trained by years of observation, noticed the faintest disturbance near the sleeping dragon root, a place his Grostar had sometimes pointed out. A tiny, almost invisible fold in the leaf litter. His fingers, surprisingly nimble despite their size, carefully probed the spot. He felt the edge of something papery. Pulling it out, he unfolded the miniature note. "Thank you. He's beautiful. I have a secret spot here too, under the root that looks like a sleeping dragon." SM. A slow smile spread across Daniel's face. SM. Sarah Miller. She had given him her initials and a secret spot. He looked up at the vast canopy, the sunlight filtering through in shifting patterns, and felt a profound sense of connection to this place, and to the girl who shared its secrets. The world felt a little wider, a little less predictable, and infinitely more interesting. He knew with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified him, that this was just the beginning. The carved secrets and hidden notes were threads, weaving an invisible tapestry between them, each new exchange tightening the weave, pulling them closer into a world only they knew. He thought of his upcoming baptism, of the solemn vows, of the path laid out before him, and then he thought of the delicate wooden squirrel, and the hidden note, and a life he was only just beginning to imagine. Words across the divide. The familiar path to their shared sanctuary felt different now, imbued with a nervous energy that hummed beneath Sarah's skin. Yesterday's rain had left the woods smelling of damp earth and pine, a scent that usually soothed her, but today it only sharpened her anticipation. She located the hollowed-out log, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached inside. A folded piece of paper, thicker than her own note, lay nestled there. Daniel's handwriting, neat and deliberate, was stark against the cream-colored page. She pulled it out, her heart quickening, and retreated to a mossy bank a little further off, shielded by a stand of young birch trees. The rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze seemed to amplify the quiet thumping in her chest. Unfolding the letter, she began to read. Daniel wrote of his days, sketching a vivid picture of life on the farm. He described the arduous work of tilling the spring fields, the careful tending of the young corn shoots, and the satisfying ache in his muscles at day's end. He spoke of his younger siblings, their boisterous games in the yard, and the quiet evenings spent around the kitchen table, the only light coming from a single kerosene lamp. But beneath these daily details, a subtle thread of introspection wove its way through his words. He mentioned the weight of expectation, the looming baptism, and a faint, almost imperceptible tremor of uncertainty about his future, a path laid out generations before him. He spoke of the beauty he found in carving wood, not just as a craft, but as a form of expression, a way to release thoughts that couldn't be voiced. He admitted, in a carefully phrased sentence, that he sometimes wondered about the world beyond the fences of their community, a world he knew only from the distant hum of traffic and glimpses of brightly colored clothes in town. He ended by expressing a profound sense of gratitude for her letters, for the unexpected connection they offered. Sarah read the letter twice, absorbing every word. She could almost picture him, his hands calloused from work, his brow furrowed in thought as he penned these secret confidences. His quiet struggles resonated deeply within her. She recognized the pressure to conform, though her world offered far more choices. This wasn't just a game anymore, it was a profound exchange of souls. She tucked the letter carefully into her pocket, the paper warm against her thigh, a tangible link between their two disparate lives. Later that afternoon, Daniel, feigning a need to check a fence line bordering the woods, slipped away from the farm. The afternoon sun dappled through the canopy, painting shifting patterns on the forest floor. His heart beat a steady rhythm against his ribs, a drumbeat of anticipation. He found the log, his gaze sweeping the surroundings before he dared to reach inside. Her letter, folded neatly, waited. He withdrew to a secluded spot, near a babbling brook whose gentle murmur would mask any rustling. Sarah's handwriting was bolder, more sweeping than his own, reflecting her spirited nature. She wrote of her dreams, not of a specific career, but of a life filled with meaning and discovery. She spoke of the books she read, tales of far-off lands and adventurous spirits, and how they fueled her desire to see more, to experience more. She described her small town, its familiar faces and predictable rhythms, but also her longing for something beyond its borders. She told him about her plans for college, a world she envisioned as a place of endless possibilities and intellectual freedom. Her words painted a vibrant picture of an English life, full of choices and individual pursuits, a stark contrast to the communal path laid out for him. She also shared her anxieties, her fear of disappointing her parents, and the uncertainty of stepping into an unknown future. She ended by confessing how much their exchanges meant to her, how he understood a part of her no one else did. Daniel reread her letter, a quiet fascination blooming within him. Her world, so different from his own, was revealed through her candid words. He found himself drawn to her adventurous spirit, her unbridled curiosity. He realized how little he truly knew of the outside world, and her letters were a window, offering tantalizing glimpses. He felt a profound sense of connection, a kinship with this girl who, despite their different worlds, shared a similar yearning for understanding and self-discovery. The secrecy surrounding their communication only intensified the bond, making each word feel precious, each shared thought a testament to their growing trust. Both Sarah and Daniel returned to their respective lives, their minds buzzing with newfound insights. The woods, once a boundary, had become a bridge, their letters the planks spanning the divide. They understood each other not just as individuals, but as souls grappling with the expectations and desires of their unique worlds. Despite the silence and the physical distance, their emotional connection deepened with every shared word, weaving a complex, invisible thread between them. The risk was undeniable, the consequences potentially devastating, yet the intimacy born from their hidden correspondence felt too vital to abandon. Their understanding of each other was growing, subtly yet profoundly, laying the groundwork for something far more significant than either of them could yet articulate. Stolen moments. The hollow log, once a mere conduit for letters, became a silent witness to their increasingly frequent rendezvous. What began as cautious, almost accidental encounters beneath the ancient oak, now stretched into long, sun-dappled afternoons. Sarah found herself gravitating towards the edge of her family's property, a book often clutched in her hand as an excuse, her gaze invariably drifting towards the distant fields where Daniel's buggy might appear, and he, in turn, seemed to find more reasons to tend to the fence line bordering her land, or to gather fallen branches from the woods that skirted their shared boundary. Their conversations blossomed beyond the initial guarded exchanges. They spoke of the changing seasons, the habits of the local wildlife, and the intricate patterns of the clouds overhead. Sarah recounted tales from the novels she devoured, painting vivid pictures of far-off lands and daring adventures. Daniel, his hands often idly carving a sliver of wood he'd pocketed, described the subtle nuances of different timber, the way a cherry branch yielded to a chisel compared to the stubborn resistance of oak. He spoke of his day, the rhythm of farm life, and the satisfaction of a well-tended field. She, in turn, shared her dreams of college, the vibrant hum of a city, and the endless possibilities she imagined lay beyond their valley. Laughter, initially hesitant, now bubbled freely between them. Sarah loved the way Daniel's eyes crinkled at the corners when she told a particularly outlandish story, and he found a quiet joy in the uninhibited sound of her mirth. There were comfortable silences too, moments where they simply sat, side by side, listening to the rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of crickets, a profound understanding passing between them without a single word. An unspoken current, warm and insistent, began to flow beneath their easy companionship, a palpable attraction that blurred the lines of their nascent friendship. One sweltering afternoon, after a particularly long stretch of fence mending, Sarah arrived at their meeting spot with a small cooler. "It's too hot for tea," she declared, pulling out 2 slightly melting ice cream cones, wrapped carefully in napkins. "I thought you might like to try something different." Daniel's eyes widened slightly at the sight. He'd seen English children with these frozen treats from a distance, but had never held one himself. The sweet, creamy scent filled the air. He accepted the cone with a tentative hand, its coldness a startling sensation against his palm. He watched Sarah take a delicate lick, then mimicked her, a slow, hesitant taste. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, followed by a quiet smile. "It's quite refreshing," he admitted, his voice soft as the vanilla melted on his tongue. He found himself savoring each bite, the simple pleasure a novel experience. Sarah watched him, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. This shared, ordinary moment felt profoundly significant, a quiet defiance of the invisible walls that separated their worlds. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Daniel found himself lingering longer than usual. The ice cream had long since been consumed, the cooler packed away, yet neither made a move to leave. He traced the grain of a fallen leaf with his thumb, his gaze distant. "Sometimes," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I wonder what else I don't know." Sarah looked at him, her heart aching with a tenderness she hadn't known she possessed. "There's a whole world out there, Daniel," she replied, her voice gentle. "More than you can imagine." The weight of her words settled between them, heavy with unspoken desires and the stark reality of their divergent paths. The ease of their stolen moments, the shared laughter, the simple pleasure of an ice cream cone. All of it now felt imbued with a fragile intensity, a dangerous beauty. Each passing day, each secret meeting, chipped away at the foundations of their separate lives, weaving them together with threads that were becoming increasingly difficult to sever. The oak, ancient and unmoving, stood as a silent testament to a connection deepening with every whispered confidence, every shared glance, every lingering touch of hands that brushed too close. The first touch, the late afternoon sun, usually a fiery send-off to the day, softened to a buttery glow, filtering through the dense canopy of oaks that marked their boundary. Sarah sat on the fallen log, tracing patterns in the loose dirt with a twig, the silence between them heavier than usual. Daniel, perched on a moss-covered stone nearby, watched her, his gaze intense, yet laced with an unfamiliar hesitancy. He'd arrived with a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a cardinal, its vibrant painted feathers a stark contrast to the muted greens and browns of the woods. He'd placed it gently in her palm, a silent offering, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest, most innocent instant. That fleeting contact, barely a feather-light graze, had been enough to crack the carefully constructed dam of their unspoken feelings. Sarah's breath hitched, a warmth spread from her hand up her arm and settled in her chest. A familiar, yet suddenly amplified thrum. She clutched the bird, its smooth wood warm against her skin. "It's beautiful, Daniel," she whispered, her voice a little unsteady. "So lifelike." He cleared his throat, a low rumble. "Cardinals are a symbol, I've heard, of hope, of devotion." His eyes, usually so direct, darted away, then back, searching hers. "I thought you might like it." The words hung in the air, weighted with more meaning than their simple definitions allowed. Hope, devotion, the unspoken vows of a world they both knew they shouldn't share. Sarah felt a tremor pass through her. She looked at the bird, then up at him, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely audible. The air thickened, charged with an unspoken current, a tangible tension that vibrated between them. Daniel shifted on the stone, his hands clasped, then unclasped. A bead of sweat traced a path down his temple. He looked at her hand, still cradling the wooden bird, then slowly, almost imperceptibly, he extended his own. His fingers, calloused from work, hesitated inches from hers. Sarah's gaze locked onto his, a silent question passing between them. Her breath hitched. The world seemed to shrink, fading to the periphery, leaving only the two of them, suspended in that charged moment. His touch, when it finally came, was feather-light, tentative, as if testing the fragility of glass. His thumb brushed over the back of her hand, a soft, slow caress that sent a jolt of pure, undiluted electricity through her. It wasn't a grab, not a squeeze, but a gentle exploration, a careful acknowledgement of the connection that had been building between them for weeks. Sarah felt her own hand tremble, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her palm slightly, allowing their fingers to intertwine, a fragile, daring entanglement. The contact was electric, a silent symphony playing between their skin. It was more than just touch. It was an unspoken acknowledgement, a confession in the language of nerve endings. Her pulse hammered, a frantic drumbeat in her ears. Daniel's eyes, usually so composed, held a raw vulnerability she hadn't seen before, a mixture of fear and profound longing. His grip, though still gentle, tightened almost imperceptibly, as if anchoring himself to her. In that moment, everything shifted. The books, the city dreams, the farm, the community, all faded into a distant hum. There was only the warmth of his hand in hers, the silent understanding that bloomed between them. A fragile, dangerous flower. This was it. The line had been crossed. The boundary blurred not just by words and shared glances, but by the undeniable, physical truth of their connection. A chill, despite the lingering warmth of the sun, snaked up Sarah's spine. The electric thrill of their intertwined fingers was immediately followed by a cold wave of realization. This was forbidden. Every fiber of their respective worlds screamed it. This simple touch, so profound, so natural, was also a betrayal, a dangerous step into an unknown that could unravel everything. She saw the same stark understanding flicker in Daniel's eyes, the sudden tension in his jaw. His thumb continued its slow, hypnotic sweep over her knuckles. A silent question. A desperate plea. They held each other's gaze, the quiet woods bearing witness to their silent, powerful exchange. The risks were immense, the implications terrifying. But for now, in the golden light of the fading afternoon, with their hands intertwined, the beauty of their forbidden bond eclipsed the shadows of consequence, if only for a fleeting, precious moment. Whispers and suspicions. The crisp autumn air, once Sarah's confidant, now seemed to carry 1,000 watchful eyes. Her daily excursions to the winding paths bordering the woods, once unremarkable, now drew hushed comments from Mrs. Gable across the street. "Out early again, dear," she'd called out one Tuesday, her tone saccharine, her gaze lingering on Sarah's mud-dusted boots. Later, Sarah overheard Mrs. Henderson at the market, her voice lowered but distinct, mentioning that Miller girl and her wanderings. Sarah felt a prickle of unease. The small town's rhythm, once comforting, now felt suffocatingly inquisitive. Each solitary walk, a cherished escape, now felt like an open invitation for speculation, each rustle of leaves a whispered judgment. Miles away, in the quiet order of the Fisher farm, a different kind of observation was unfolding. Daniel, typically a diligent and focused presence in the workshop, had developed a quietness that was less peaceful and more profound. His hands, usually deft with tools, occasionally paused mid-carve, his gaze distant, lost somewhere beyond the finished grain of the wood. Rebecca, his mother, a woman whose intuition ran as deep as the roots of the ancient oak by their barn, noticed the subtle shifts. He ate less. His answers to her questions were often clipped, and a certain restlessness hummed beneath his usually calm demeanor. One evening, as the lamplight cast long shadows across the kitchen table, Samuel, Daniel's father, finally spoke. "You've been preoccupied, son," he stated, his voice a low rumble, devoid of accusation but heavy with expectation. He watched Daniel across the table, his own eyes, usually unreadable, now sharp with concern. Daniel merely nodded, stirring his coffee, the spoon clinking softly against the ceramic. Just thinking, Dad. Rebecca, kneading dough by the hearth, paused her rhythm. Thinking of what, Daniel? Her tone was gentle, but her gaze, when it met his, was unwavering. She saw the flicker of something unsaid in his eyes, a depth of emotion he rarely displayed. He was usually so transparent, his thoughts mirroring the clear mountain stream. Now, a murky undercurrent swirled. Of the future, Daniel finally offered, his voice barely above a whisper. It was a truthful answer, in a way, but not the whole truth, and the omission hung heavy in the air between them. Samuel grunted, a sound that could mean agreement or skepticism. It was hard to tell. Rebecca, however, pressed her lips together, her intuition screaming that his future was far more complicated than he let on. The very next day, as Daniel was delivering a finished cabinet to a neighboring farm, he encountered Jacob, a childhood friend whose farm bordered the English road. Jacob, a man whose easy smile often masked a shrewd mind, caught Daniel's eye by the roadside. "Daniel," Jacob called out, his voice hushed as Daniel approached with his horse and buggy. A word. Daniel reined in his horse, a flicker of apprehension in his chest. Jacob leaned in, his voice dropping further. "Saw you a few days back, near the old creek, past the Miller place, with an English girl." Daniel's breath hitched. He felt a cold dread seep into his bones. He knew Jacob had seen them, had seen the moment he'd given Sarah the cardinal. Jacob's gaze was serious, his brow furrowed. She had red hair, and that laugh, rather distinctive. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Be careful, friend. Such things. They don't go unnoticed." He straightened, his expression returning to its usual amiable warmth, but his eyes held a warning Daniel couldn't ignore. "The bishop is already asking about unusual activity near the borders." The word struck Daniel like a physical blow. The cardinal in Sarah's hand, the touch that had ignited a fire in him, now felt like a brand, marking them both. The unspoken dam had broken between them, but now a deluge of potential consequences threatened to drown them. He nodded mutely, his throat suddenly tight, and urged his horse forward. The weight of Jacob's warning pressing down on him, heavy and inescapable. The whispers had begun, and they were closing in. Confrontations and warnings. The soothing scent of lavender, usually a comfort from the sachet beneath Sarah's pillow, offered no solace against the knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. Her carelessness had a name. Daniel's latest letter, a pressed wildflower nestled within, left exposed beneath a stack of textbooks. The mistake materialized with her mother's voice. A sudden, sharp intrusion into the quiet hum of the house. "Sarah Miller, what is this?" Her mother stood framed in the doorway, a pale envelope clutched like a damning piece of evidence. The vibrant purple wildflower, now a silent accuser on the crisp white paper, seemed to mock Sarah. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "It's a letter," she managed, attempting a nonchalance that utterly failed her. "I can see that. From whom? And why is it hidden?" Her mother's gaze, unwavering and scrutinizing, felt like a prosecutor's interrogation. "And what is an English girl doing exchanging secrets with an Amish boy?" The last sentence hung heavy, laden with the town's whispers, and her mother's unmistakable disapproval. "It's just Daniel. He's a friend," Sarah insisted, her voice tight with strain. "We talk sometimes. There's nothing untoward." The word felt flimsy, a pathetic shield against the implied accusations. "Friendship, Sarah, does not require such stealth. Nor does it typically involve boys from another world." Her mother countered, her tone softening marginally even as her resolve hardened. "This is dangerous. You know what people say. You know the implications. You're inviting trouble, for yourself and for him. You need to stop." "Stop what?" Being friendly? Sarah pushed back, a familiar defiance igniting within her. He understands things, Mum. Things no one else here does. He's just a good person. The exchange ended with a weary sigh from her mother, a stark warning about looming consequences, and the letter confiscated, its wildflower now a stark emblem of Sarah's shattered trust. Miles away, the rhythmic rasp of Daniel's plane shaping a new oak table echoed through the Fisher workshop. The familiar scent of sawdust, usually a balm, felt oppressive today, thick with the weight of his father's unspoken scrutiny. Samuel Fisher leaned against a workbench, his silent observation of Daniel's meticulous movements a quiet, unyielding burden. "The bishop spoke to me, son," Samuel said, his voice low, devoid of overt anger but carrying an undeniable gravity. "Jacob's words travel far. He saw you near the borderland. With an English girl." Daniel's hands paused, a sliver of wood still clinging to the plane's blade. He kept his eyes fixed on the grain, not daring to meet his father's steady gaze. "My baptism approaches, Daniel," Samuel continued, his voice a quiet reminder of an immutable truth. "Soon you will make your sacred promise to God, to our community. This is not a time for distractions. The world beyond our fence is not for us. It leads to straying, to losing one's way. Remember your commitment. Remember your faith." Daniel offered a single taut nod. "I understand, Dad." The words felt hollow, a performance for his father, for the crushing weight of expectations. He understood the pronouncements, but his heart felt a different, rebellious pull. Later that week, beneath the towering oaks that marked their border, Sarah approached their usual meeting spot. Daniel was already there, his face etched with a new, deeper worry. "We can't meet here anymore," he stated, his voice hushed. "Elder Yoda passed by just moments ago. He almost saw me. I had to flatten myself against a fallen log." Sarah's breath hitched. "That close?" The abstract peril sharpened, cutting through any lingering romantic haze. "We need a new way. A safer way," Daniel said, his gaze sweeping the dense woods. "I saw an old trapper's lean-to, deeper in, near the creek. It's overgrown, hard to spot. And we need a signal, something only we know." They spoke in hurried whispers, inventing a system of twisted branches and strategically placed stones, a hidden map known only to them. The urgency of their situation intensified their connection, a shared conspiracy solidifying their bond. As they parted, the setting sun cast long, distorted shadows, mirroring the intricate, perilous path they were now forced to navigate. The confrontations with their families, the narrow escape from discovery, and the creation of their elaborate secret. Each step drew them further into a self-woven web, a world where their choices now carried ever-increasing weight. The impossible choice. The moon, a sliver of platinum on an obsidian sky, cast long, wavering shadows as Sarah stole towards the ancient oak. Her heart thrummed a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of longing and dread. Daniel waited, a silent sentinel beneath the sprawling branches, his broad shoulders a familiar anchor in the deepening twilight. The air, crisp with damp earth and the last vestiges of honeysuckle, seemed to vibrate with unspoken truths. "Daniel," she breathed, her voice catching. He turned, eyes typically serene, now alight with a raw vulnerability that mirrored her own. He reached for her, hands, toughened by years of carving wood, gently cradling her face. The contact sparked a tremor through her, a jolt of both yearning and apprehension. "Sarah," he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. I can't pretend any longer." Tears welled, hot and stinging. She understood. The carefully constructed barriers around their hearts had crumbled, leaving them exposed to a truth too potent to deny. "I can't either," she confessed, her own voice barely a murmur. "I love you, Daniel." The words hung in the air, weighted with both liberation and despair. Daniel's thumb traced a path down her cheek, wiping a tear. "And you, Sarah. More than anything." His voice fractured, a single tear escaping his own eye, catching the moonlight like a tiny, fragile star. The anguish in his gaze was a physical ache in her chest. They clung to each other then, a desperate embrace that spoke volumes of their shared plight, their bodies a silent testament to a love that defied every boundary. The gravity of their confession settled upon them, a beautiful, terrible burden. The world beyond their small secret haven seemed to press in, threatening to overwhelm them. Sarah knew, with a sickening certainty, that their love was a direct challenge to everything Daniel had ever known. Long after Daniel had vanished into the pre-dawn mist, Sarah sat hunched over her laptop, its glow illuminating her tear-streaked face. Her trembling fingers typed into the search bar. Amish shunning consequences. The articles that materialized were stark, unyielding. Excommunication, isolation, a complete severance from family, friends, and community. Daniel would lose his parents, his siblings, his entire support system. He would become an outcast, a ghost in the world he'd always called home, without a trade or skills recognized in the English world, adrift and alone amidst its complex rules and relentless pace. The implications were staggering. Sarah felt a cold dread seep into her bones. Was she asking him to sacrifice everything, to dismantle his very identity, for her? The thought was a bitter poison. Meanwhile, Daniel, back in the quiet order of his family's farm, found no solace. The rhythmic creak of the barn door, the familiar scent of hay and livestock, even the comforting drone of his father's prayers, offered no reprieve from the turmoil raging within him. His chisel lay untouched on his workbench, the half-finished carving of a soaring eagle mocking his grounded spirit. He pictured Sarah's face, her tear-filled eyes as she uttered those 3 words that had irrevocably altered his world. He had never imagined such a depth of feeling, such a fierce connection. But then he saw his father's stoic face, his mother's gentle smile, his younger siblings playing in the yard. He heard the familiar hymns, the comforting cadence of the Pennsylvania Dutch dialect. This was his life, his heritage, his faith. This was who he was. His upcoming baptism, once a source of quiet anticipation, now loomed like a precipice. To commit to the Ordnung meant to turn his back on Sarah, on the burgeoning, forbidden joy she brought into his life. To choose Sarah meant to sever himself from generations of his family, to become a stranger to his own blood. The choice felt impossible, a cruel dichotomy. His heart ached with the intensity of his love for Sarah, a love that promised a vibrant, unknown future. But his soul was tethered to the quiet strength of his community, to the unwavering faith that had shaped him since birth. The internal struggle was a relentless, agonizing battle, each side tearing at the fabric of his being. He closed his eyes, picturing the vast, unbridgeable chasm between their 2 worlds, and the chilling realization that one of them, perhaps both, would have to jump. Discovery and ultimatum. The familiar balm of damp earth and pine needles, usually a comfort, only intensified the frantic rhythm in Daniel's chest. He tightened his grip on the small, hand-carved wooden bird, its smooth contours speaking of countless quiet hours of dedication. This was for Sarah. Their meeting spot, a cluster of ancient oaks anchoring the edge of his family's land, felt both consecrated and perilously exposed. Bruised purple and apricot tinged the western sky as the last vestiges of twilight bled away. Sarah materialized from the deepening shadows, her slender form a graceful counterpoint to the fading light. A caught breath escaped Daniel as her cool, firm fingers intertwined with his. "Daniel," she murmured, her voice a soothing current that, for a fleeting instant, stilled his inner tumult. He presented the bird. She cradled it, her thumb tracing the delicate feather etchings, a soft smile blooming on her lips, a silent understanding passing between them. A sudden, sharp snap of a twig from behind a hawthorn thicket shattered the fragile peace. Both froze, eyes wide, hands still entwined. Jacob, Daniel's younger brother, burst from the undergrowth, flushed and breathless, his gaze flitting between their clasped hands and the undeniable wooden bird. Shock and anger ignited his eyes. "Daniel!" Jacob's voice, a raw, accusing bark, ripped through the quiet evening. "What? What are you doing with her?" He gestured wildly at Sarah, his chest heaving with indignation. The air crackled with accusation. A cold dread spread through Daniel. He instinctively withdrew his hand from Sarah's, a reflexive act of self-preservation that instantly flooded him with shame. Sarah, however, held her ground, her chin lifting in defiance, though a flicker of apprehension danced in her eyes. "Jacob, please," Daniel pleaded, his voice a low, desperate attempt to quell the rising storm. "Go home." "Go home," Jacob scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping him. "And leave you, with her. The bishop spoke of you, Daniel, of the English girl. Father warned you." His voice escalated with each word, nearing a shout. "You are to be baptized. You shame us." "Jacob, stop it," Sarah interjected, her voice surprisingly steady, though edged with steel. "This has nothing to do with you." "It has everything to do with me," Jacob retorted, stepping closer, his face contorted with outrage. "It has everything to do with our family, with our community. Do you know what they will do to him? To all of us?" He pointed a trembling finger at Daniel. "I will tell them. I will tell Father everything." He spun on his heel, vanishing back into the encroaching gloom, his heavy footsteps thudding with furious purpose. A suffocating silence descended, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the frantic beat of Daniel's heart. Sarah moved closer, her hand finding his arm, a comforting pressure. "He'll tell them," she whispered, her voice thick with a sorrow that mirrored his own. Daniel could only nod, his throat tight, the taste of ash in his mouth. The inevitable had arrived, sooner and more brutally than he had imagined. When Daniel reached the farmhouse, lamps cast long, disquieting shadows. Samuel, his father, sat at the kitchen table, his usually calm face now etched with grim displeasure. Rebecca, his mother, stood with her back to him at the stove, her shoulders rigid. Jacob hovered near the doorway, a mixture of triumph and apprehension in his eyes. "Daniel," Samuel's voice was heavy, stripped of its customary warmth. "Come sit." Daniel obeyed, his legs feeling like lead. The air was thick with unspoken recrimination. Rebecca turned, her face pale, her gaze a sharp probe. "Jacob has told us." Daniel remained silent, his eyes fixed on the worn wooden tabletop. Denial was futile. The raw, exposed truth hung between them. "The bishop mentioned you, about the English girl near the borderland," Samuel began, his voice flat. "I reminded you of your baptism, of your commitment." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "We are a community, Daniel. We are one in faith, one in way of life." Rebecca stepped forward, her voice softer, yet no less firm. "You understand what this means, son. To choose outside. To choose a path that is not ours." Her eyes, usually so full of gentle understanding, held a deep, profound sadness. "You cannot inhabit both worlds, Daniel. Not anymore." Samuel leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "You have a choice, Daniel. Renounce this girl, this friendship. Commit yourself wholly to our traditions, to your baptism, to your family, or you will be shunned. Immediately. There will be no returning." The words hung in the air, a physical weight pressing down on Daniel. Renounce Sarah. Erase her from his heart, his thoughts, his future, or forfeit everything else, his family, his community, the only life he had ever known. The choice, stark and brutal, tore at his very soul. He looked at his father, his mother, at Jacob, whose youthful face now held a grave, almost fearful expression. The silence stretched, unbearable, demanding an answer that felt impossible to give. The sacrifice. Wood smoke and the sweet perfume of baking bread wove through the air, borne on a soft breeze that offered little comfort to the tumult churning within Sarah. From the periphery of the Miller homestead, where overgrown sumac provided a meager screen, she watched the distant lantern glow at the Fisher farm. Tonight marked the pre-baptism gathering, a grave occasion sealing Daniel's final public declaration. A dull, persistent ache resonated in her chest, a counterpoint to the rapid pulse thrumming against her ribs. Her mother's cutting words from that afternoon still pricked, sharp and unforgiving. That Fisher boy, Sarah, he's not for us. You understand that, don't you? Sarah had managed only a non-committal shrug, a flimsy cloak for the defiance seething beneath. She understood, yes, but comprehension offered no balm for the sting. Her fingers tightened around a smooth riverstone, its cool surface a stark counterpoint to the heat in her eyes. At the Fisher farm, lanterns threw long, dancing shadows across the barn's planked floor. The air hummed with hushed conversations and the aroma of fresh-cut hay. Daniel stood amongst his peers, shoulders unyielding beneath his simple shirt. He felt his mother, Rebecca, observing him from across the crowded space. Her gaze a gentle, but unwavering anchor. His father, Samuel, stood nearer, a quiet, unmovable presence. Jacob, ever watchful, darted quick glances his way, a flicker of something unreadable in his young eyes. Triumph. Guilt. Daniel couldn't tell. The bishop's voice, slow and deliberate, sliced through the quiet. Daniel Fisher, have you weighed the path before you? Do you stand firm in your desire to join the fellowship of God's people? A profound sorrow enveloped Daniel. Sarah's face materialized in his mind. Her bright smile, the pleasant crinkle at the corners of her eyes when she laughed. He recalled the hand-carved bird, the brush of her warm fingers against his, the forbidden thrill of their whispered confidences, the unspoken accord that had blossomed between them. Their love felt as intrinsic as breath, yet it existed beyond the boundaries of everything he had ever known. He met his parents' gazes, their faces etched with a blend of concern and hope. He saw the gathered community, their expectant stares, their interwoven past and future. He considered the deep roots of his faith, the solace of belonging, the immense weight of generations of tradition resting on his young shoulders. To choose Sarah meant severing himself from it all, casting himself adrift in a world he barely comprehended, a world that would never truly claim him. It meant shattering his mother's heart, failing his father, and leaving Jacob with a broken image of his older brother. A deep breath caught in his throat. His voice, when it emerged, was hoarse, a bare whisper. I do. The two simple words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken sacrifice. They struck Sarah's already fractured heart with the force of a hammer blow, even from her distant perch. She couldn't decipher the specifics, but she saw Daniel's bowed head, the solemn nods of the men surrounding him. A tremor ran through her, a cold, undeniable certainty. He had made his choice. He had chosen his kin, his creed, his way of life. A hot, stinging tear finally escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. It wasn't just Daniel's choice, she realized with a fresh wave of agony. It was hers too, to not intervene, to not rush forward, to not shatter the solemnity of the moment, to honor the impossible bind he found himself in. He was sacrificing their love for a higher purpose, one he believed in with every fiber of his being. And in that moment, Sarah understood she too had to make a sacrifice. She had to let him go. The riverstone felt impossibly heavy in her grasp. The glow from the Fisher farm seemed to recede, dimming into the vast, indifferent night. The weight of his decision, and now her own, settled over her like a shroud. a silent acknowledgement. The aroma of roasted coffee, subtly interwoven with the faint, sweet scent of aging paper, enveloped Sarah. It was the comforting essence of the written word, her sanctuary. 6 years had dissolved since Daniel last walked out of her life, since she'd watched, from a desolate distance, him choose a future that held no place for her. The initial searing ache had long since mellowed, transforming into a tender, almost cherished memory she guarded like a secret garden in her heart. She had meticulously cultivated a fulfilling life, a quiet symphony of rustling pages and murmured literary discourse. Yet, unforeseen moments would still pierce her composure. A particular slant of sunlight, the rich, damp earthiness after a spring rain, or the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. These sensory echoes would whisk her back to stolen embraces and hushed vows. Her fingertips, now calloused from countless hours of shelving and unboxing, idly traced the spines of newly arrived hardcovers. On the counter, tucked amidst a stack of invoices, lay a small, unassuming package. It bore no publisher's insignia, no return address, just plain brown paper secured with simple twine. A gentle current of curiosity tugged at her. She carefully undid the knot, her mind sifting through possibilities. A belated birthday token from a friend, a forgotten special order. Inside, nestled on a bed of shredded paper, was an intricately carved wooden bird. It settled perfectly in her palm, smooth and cool against her skin. Unpainted, unstained, its natural grain gleamed with a soft polish. Its wings were subtly spread, captured mid-flight, and the delicate feather details were breathtakingly precise. A sparrow, she realized, common in nature, yet imbued here with an extraordinary vitality. Her breath snagged. Only one person she knew possessed such an innate gift for woodcraft, hands capable of coaxing such exquisite beauty from a simple block of timber. Daniel. The recognition was immediate, a visceral jolt. A cascade of long-dormant emotions surged. Nostalgia, a bitter-sweet pang of yearning, and a profound, quiet understanding. No note, no sender's name accompanied the bird. Its anonymity was intrinsic to its message, a silent testament to the enduring boundaries, the unspoken pact between them. This wasn't a rekindling, she knew. It was something deeper, a bridge spanning years and separate worlds, affirming a connection that transcended physical presence. Her thumb grazed the smooth curve of its head, conjuring the memory of his calloused fingers intertwined with hers, the faint scent of sawdust and fresh earth that always clung to him. The craftsmanship was undeniable. The patient dedication, the meticulous attention to detail, the way the wood seemed to thrum with an inner life. This was his work. The sparrow, a humble emblem of resilience and freedom, even within constraint, resonated profoundly. It wasn't a grand declaration, but a subtle, potent whisper. It spoke of shared history, of quiet acknowledgement, of a love that, despite all, had etched an indelible mark on her soul. It said, without words, "I remember. I haven't forgotten." And in that silent validation, Sarah found a measure of peace she hadn't realized she was still seeking. The tears that welled weren't of sorrow, but a profound, quiet relief. It was closure, perhaps not the dramatic storybook kind, but one that felt utterly authentic to their unique, complicated history. It was an affirmation that their love, though unfulfilled in the traditional sense, had been real, significant, and mutually cherished. She placed the wooden bird on a high shelf in her office, where the morning sun would illuminate its polished surface. It sat among her favorite first editions and treasured literary awards, a silent, humble guardian. Every time her gaze drifted to it, she was reminded not of what she had lost, but of what she had gained, a love so potent it could span years and silence, a connection that spoke volumes without a single uttered word. The bird was a testament to sacrifice, yes, but also to an enduring affection. It was his final message, a quiet release for them both. Sarah smiled, a genuine, unburdened curve of her lips. She was no longer waiting, no longer yearning for a different outcome. She was simply remembering, and in that, she found a bittersweet, perfect ending to their story. The world beyond her bookstore continued its usual bustle, but within her, a long-held breath finally exhaled, leaving behind a profound sense of quiet contentment. The chapter of Daniel and Sarah, as it existed in the physical world, was truly closed. But the story of their connection, etched in the grain of a small wooden bird, would forever remain a cherished part of her.